You have said it's your goal not to raise taxes on families making under $250,000 a year, a goal. But can you say that's a promise as you stand here tonight?
That is a pledge that I'm making. I made it when I ran in 2008, yes.
When Secretary Clinton says, I'm not going to raise taxes on the middle class, let me tell you what she is saying. She is disagreeing with FDR and Social Security, LBJ on Medicare, and with the vast majority of progressive Democrats in the House and the Senate.
So there you're seeing a little piece of a simmering fight among Democrats when it comes to raising taxes on the middle class, particularly to fund other progressive programs. But here's another question at play here. Is $250,000 a year really middle class? Bryce Covert, an economic policy editor at Think Progress, doesn't think so. She joins us now to explain. So you did this piece in the New York Times. I'm not surprised you told us in the break that you are being inundated with emails. I mean, to be fair, Hillary Clinton is not the only one who has defined middle class this way.
Right. This actually goes back to her husband, Bill Clinton. He made the top tax break start at $250,000. That basically set this arbitrary limit, and Obama made the same pledge. Hillary's making this pledge this time. What's different is now there's this sparring going on between Clinton and Sanders about whether or not you raise taxes on the middle class. But of course, first you have to talk about who is the middle class. And this arbitrary limit of $250,000 or more is just out of touch with reality. It doesn't look right on the math. At a time, and we're showing this
now, when the median income is actually just $53,657.
Right. So those are the people in the exact middle, making the exact middle of the income in this country. It's far, far lower. And on top of that, if you make this limit, if you make $250,000, you're actually in the top 5% of Americans. And in a time of growing income inequality, that group at the top is pulling further and further away from those people who are actually in the middle. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense on the numbers. And then as policy, it really boxes you in.
But just to defend Bill and Hillary Clinton on this is about tax policy. This isn't about an arbitrary definition of the middle class. I mean, I think that they were both talking about where tax cuts and tax relief should be targeted to stimulate growth. So isn't it a bit of a misrepresentation to suggest that Hillary Clinton is somehow defining the middle class this way?
Well, what she keeps saying over and over is, I'm not going to raise taxes on the middle class.
But they're certainly in this group.
I would argue that those making $250,000
and
not
under
in the middle.
is the policy. I mean, the bracket is designed to craft tax policy in a way that is stimulative.
The middle class is going to be a swath of people, right? But if we're talking about medium income is somewhere around $50,000, that swath cannot be that wide. Basically, you're grabbing so many people into that group that it doesn't have any meaning anymore.
Let me ask Steve this, who's here as well. I mean, let's be blunt about what the real issue here is, which is that influence peddlers in the media and politicians live in areas where the income is far higher. And so to them, $250,000 does seem more like the middle class than it does to average Americans. And my question to you, Steve, is do you think that that influences the debate that we're having here? And, you know, if so, why?
Yeah, I think that there might be something to be said for that. At the same time, what Bryce is saying, it strikes me too. You can think back to the 1990s and Bill Clinton and where the origin of that $250,000 figure that came, you know, from Bill Clinton in the 1992 campaign. He waged at the time what was a fairly populist campaign on taxes and on economic policy. He was talking about asking the wealthiest who'd gotten richer under Reagan and Bush in the boom years of the 1980s, asking them to pay what he called their fair share and calling for, I think at the time, I think that represented the top 2% or so of incomes to go $250,000 plus. And that was seen as somewhat of a radical idea in 1992 when Bill Clinton campaigned on that. Now here we are a generation later. Obviously, the bar has moved a little bit and the discussion has changed.
But it is an interesting question you ask, because I think it was just yesterday or the day before it came out in New York that the average price of an apartment is now over $1 million.
Over $1 million, right.
And so yes, it is middle class.
I think that's a factor, but I also think that what Nicole was driving at is, you know, we've seen more income concentrated in the hands of those at the very top. So when you're crafting tax policy, you kind of go where the money is, essentially, and you can capture, if you raise taxes on those above $250,000, you can capture a lot of money.
Well, Bryce, let me ask you the last question. What kind of policy limitations is Clinton putting on herself by saying, I will not raise taxes on anyone under $250,000?
Well, we know for sure that one thing that they're fighting over right now is paid family leave. You know, the Democrats all agree we want paid family leave, but the question is, how do you do it? Sanders and O'Malley have backed the idea that congressional Democrats have backed, which is you design it like Social Security. Everybody pays in, it pays out to everyone, but that means technically a payroll tax that hits the middle class as well as the lower class and the upper class. If Hillary is really saying, I'm not going to raise taxes on the middle class, and people will hold her to that, then she can't do it that way. And then so the question is, so how do you do it? And the rest of the options aren't terribly viable.
Sure. And this is in the opinion pages in the New York Times. Bryce Cofer.
Definitely read it.
So
Good
much.
piece.
Yeah, great piece. Thanks for coming in. Still to come, Peyton Manning hires a major political player to help handle this unfolding human growth hormone scandal. But first, the incredible shrinking mayor with low poll numbers and growing frustration. What's the path forward for New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio? The author of New York Magazine's comprehensive new cover story joins the conversation.
Your approval rating is like 41, 42, 43%, and it's dipped down low. What do you do to turn that around, though? And what do you think right now is causing that drag?
Look, I think people have gone through a really tough time economically in the city. 46% of New Yorkers at or near the poverty level. That's what I inherited. But I'm also proud to say 177,000
by the way,
new jobs
the Q poll,
I
saw it 42%, but the Q poll actually has it at 45, 46, which is
See, things are going up even during this show.
Even during the show, you just picked up 3
numbers are going
like
up.
a telethon.
It's the Morning Joe bump.
That was New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio here on Morning Joe defending his low approval rating. But even the Morning Joe bump was short-lived for the Democratic mayor. In a Marist College poll released nearly a month later, de Blasio's approval rating sank to a new low, 38%. The poll also found that 55% of New Yorkers thought the city was moving in the wrong direction.
Got to get back on the show.
Joining us now, contributing editor for New York Magazine, Andrew Rice. He's got a new cover story, Who Shrunk the Mayor? It examines de Blasio's roller coaster 2-year tenure as mayor. You've got a lot of great anecdotal stuff in here. I'll tell you one quickly. I was at the White House, and Mike Bloomberg happened to come. He was talking to the president about guns. But I mentioned it to a couple of New Yorkers, and before I even got my sentence out, these New Yorkers, I don't live here anymore, I live in Washington, but they said to me, tell him to come back. You call it the atmospheric problem that he has. What is going on with Bill de Blasio?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a sort of paradox, which is that I explore in the piece, which is that, I mean, any of the by any of the evidentiary measures, the city is actually doing pretty well, and yet
economy's doing well, crime is down.
Crime is down, as the New York Times had a pretty exhaustive story over the weekend, detailing exactly how low it is. I mean, if you gave this set of circumstances to Mayor David Dinkins in 1991-92, he would say that sounds pretty good. Dinkins I mentioned because he was the last mayor to be defeated for re-election. So really, de Blasio's problems don't have so much to do with actual, real, measurable problems with the city. They're more about a generalized kind of sense that he's not really managing the city correctly.
You write specifically the New Yorkers in polls don't think the city's functioning well, as you just said. The raving vagrant on the street corner, the delivery truck blocking the box, the delayed subway. None of these urban nuisances is new, and none is fully or even or mostly within the mayor's control. But it is this perception, and I think it starts with the fact that for a long time he was late to everything. There was a lot of tension around his handling of the police department here, and they obviously are very vocal and very forceful. And there's just, like you said, this sense that things aren't going well. So how does he turn that around? What's his plan for sort of ending stronger than he started in perception?
Well, I think that he would, if he were sitting here, he would dispute to some degree the idea that he needs to do anything differently. I mean, he believes that he represents this kind of voiceless.
But let me just interrupt you. I mean, only because It's been reported, and you point out the piece, that he's frustrated by this perception. So that is it something he's happy to not do anything about?
Well, I mean, I think he's trying to do some things differently. For instance, he's trying to appear on shows like this, for instance, not deal so much with the City Hall press corps, which I think he thinks is pretty decisively against him, not entirely incorrectly, and so try to speak to voters in a more direct way. But I think he really thinks that that there's like this elite level discourse that isn't really reflective of what New Yorkers think. Now maybe he's deluded, and maybe he's right. I mean, he was right when he was at 5% or whatever in the polls in 2013. He stuck to his message, and he was proven right.
Yeah, Gene Robinson has a question for you.
A lot of mayors who make their mark on a city do it physically. They do it with big projects and big ideas and big stuff. Does De Blasio have big plans for the city, a big new development or a new bridge or something that would leave that sort of mark on New York City?
Well, I mean, I think if there's one thing that Bill de Blasio is not lacking, it's big plans and big ideas. I mean, probably the biggest one has to do with universal pre-K, which he actually delivered quite successfully. I'm the proud parent of a 4-year-old, and many of my son's classmates went to free preschool this year.
And they call and recruit you in. It is an incredible program.
Oh, yeah. Also, affordable housing, 200,000 units of affordable housing. They're making good progress towards that. So it's really, again, he's doing well. He's putting points on the board policy-wise.
Yeah, and this is sort of the maddening thing for De Blasio fans, right? It's like we delivered pre-K to 69,000 kids, 4-year-olds, and you care about squeegee men. And it's like, how do you balance these two things? And I don't know, maybe you have some insight into this, but if you're a mayor, it's the question of theatric versus policy and where you find a balance and what matters.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about it too, because I just think back to the 2013 campaign. He got 75% of the vote in the general election. He won the Democratic primary in a romp, and now here he is with these pretty middling poll numbers at best. I'm curious. So next year 2017, is a re-election year for him. Yeah. You mentioned David Dinkins, the last mayor who only made it one term. What is the risk right now that de Blasio joins Dinkins' company?
I mean, I think that if you talk to de Blasio's advisors, they're rather, no pun intended, blasé about the idea of being defeated in a Democratic primary. They think they still have a pretty reliable base of support, and they really have no challenger who's yet emerged in any kind of convincing way to take them on. That said, a 55% number saying that the city's moving in the wrong direction is a pretty troublesome one for any politician.
This is an exhaustive and, frankly, if you care about politics at all, you don't have to live in New York. It's fascinating to look at, as you call it, sort of this disconnect between the policy and the perception. And squeegee men are always going to register with New York, because it just is. Andrew Rice, thank you for coming in. The latest issue of New York Magazine is on newsstands now. When we talk about Rahm Emanuel, we were talking about it yesterday. The embattled mayor of Chicago expected to return to work later today to deal with his police department's latest use of force. The mayor was vacationing in Cuba over the weekend with his family when police shot and killed 2 unarmed people after a man called police on his son. NBC's Kevin Tibbles has more.
The 19-year-old saw him banging on his bedroom door with a baseball bat.
According to the family, Betty Jones was asked by the man upstairs to answer the door when police got here. She came out of her apartment, did just that, and seconds later, she was shot.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
Today, the family of Betty Jones gathered in her apartment without her.
I feel like I just want to wake up and just have my mom say, "Girl, that was a dream." But I can't. She's gone. She was murdered. And that's all that sits in my heart.
19-year-old Quintonio LaGreer was also killed. His family says he had developed a mental illness.
Now, police say that Betty Jones, who is a mother of 5, was struck by accident. We've also learned that the father of the 19-year-old who originally called police on his son is now suing the city, and that lawsuit contradicts the police department's story that Quintonio LaGreer was combative before he was shot. It also accuses the police officer of failing to provide the college student with medical help after the shooting. The city's Independent Police Review Board is investigating. And we were, yesterday there was a call for, by the Reverend Al Sharpton that he thinks at this point Rahm Emanuel needs to resign. He wasn't going to come back. There was this outcry. You need to get back to your city. And they issued a statement saying he was going to come back.
I mean, before we get to Rahm, what does this community do? This family called the cops for help with a mentally ill disturbed son. There's no proof that they were threatened by him. They needed help with him. He was in crisis. What does the community do next time someone needs help?
Well, exactly. Who do you call? You call the police, right?
I mean, that seems like the most broken piece. Forget about the fact that they don't feel protected by the police force. What do they do in a crisis?
Yeah, right. Well, and I mean,
and that's what a family member said. The family member said, you know, he had a baseball bat, and we called because we wanted help. We needed help
to de-escalate.
And you have to, I mean, you have to sit back and say, okay, there's been multiple instances where cops have said we felt threatened, we felt like we were under siege, and then videotapes have surfaced where it just clearly wasn't the case. And this is what ties the Tamir Rice story to the Chicago story. This is what ties the Tamir Rice story to the Chicago story, which is at this juncture you have to be cynical or skeptical about the story that the police are telling, and it makes a very valid case for more cameras. But you know,
well, especially in Chicago, right, with the Laquan McDonald, right, with you know, where the police officers told a story that is demonstrably false.
And with the death rate,
simply not true.
All right, so what does Rahm do now? I mean, you can come home.
Howard,
he's in deep trouble. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. The suppression of the film for 450 days, well, because he was running for re-election of the murder of. Yeah. I mean, the Chicago Police Department's in a lot of trouble. They were running essentially off the record jails. And incarcerating Chicagoans without, and nobody could know where they were. They wouldn't tell their lawyers. They wouldn't tell. I mean, this is completely out of control. Completely out of control. The city is out of control.
Look, this is a test of Rahm Emanuel's ability as an administrator, as a mayor, to get control of this police department, to get to the bottom.
It sounds like what he's saying. It sounds like what he's saying is the test is already done.
Well, I was just going to say he's not passing the test. I mean, he's not passing the test.
Is the test still going? You think there are people still judging and weighing, or do you think
fewer and fewer? Frankly, I think I agree with Howard that he's in deep political trouble.
What do you think?
Yeah. No, there's no debate about it. And you know, unfortunately timed vacation. He's coming back, which he has to do. But you know, this is sort of the end. This is the end. This is the end, this is the end, not the beginning. I mean, it got to a point on substantive levels where the police literally were running their own fiefdom. And if you're the mayor of the city, that can't happen. That's